So that is today. That is what's happening today, very cutting edge and exciting, but it is what's happening today. This next panel, I think, is the most exciting because it's to talk about the future. What is that going to look like? One of the challenges in this future is it's a big space, so what do? I've attempted to put some aspects of this together that hopefully can guide this conversation a little bit. The first is the fact that there's a lot of technology around that develops quite quickly, but then really hits a sweet spot. And this point, beyond which there's really no point in doing a lot of more work, the problem is solved. So retina displays, once you can't see the pixels, really, what's the point in making smaller pixels? Digital audio, once you've got CD quality, the problem's solved. It's a facsimile of what was done. And so one of the parameters, one of the aspects that I'm encouraging the panel to explore is when we're thinking about this future, are there aspects which we think, there is a sweet spot, there is a goal that we can achieve, beyond which we really don't want to spend any more effort because the problem is solved? Or, on the other hand, is it something where it's just more is better and we just want more of it, and we want demigods to take over our lives and sit in a floating bath of warm bliss? Well, that's what the panel's here to discuss, and I feel very privileged to introduce this panel as uniquely qualified to discuss this from a wide range of perspectives. So I'm going to bring on the panel together, and then we're going to do a quick introduction, and we're going to allow each of them to offer their view on the vision. And then finally, at the end of it, we're all going to move over to Lab to Live Meet the Speaker, which is down that way, I believe. I'm pretty sure I've got my direction right. And that's where we can have an open mic Q&A with all of the chatbot speakers we had this afternoon for an hour. Great, so please give a round warm of appreciation to the panel joining us now. Headphones. Wherever you like, take a seat. This is the sunniest chair. I recommend not there. That's extremely hot. The hot seat, literally. I'll move this back. We have a great panel here, so I'm going to do quick introductions. So yeah, you know me, right? So the next one, Lauren Kunze. Lauren is the CEO of Pandorabots, which is the oldest and most well-established chatbot builder in the world, and created over 325,000 bots. Then we have Alexander Weidauer, the co-founder and CEO of Rasa. Rasa's got some really interesting models for how to create new systems, another chatbot builder. Then we've got Alice Zimmerman, the Google Assistant UK lead. Great to have you here, Alice. Where's Alice gone? Hello. Under my chin. That's right. And Tobias Goebel, Senior Director of Emerging Tech at Aspect. And of note, Tobias led the architecture for Lidl UK's Margot the Winebot. Those of you who have tried that, it's quite an experience. And then we've got Dr. Julia Shaw, who's joined us again, co-founder of Spot, as you know, and William Tunstall-Pedoe, founder of Evie, which became Amazon's Alexa. Great, so the aspects that, yes? Oh, do you want some? Oh, you want to hear me? Okay, that's fine. So the aspects we're exploring here in this space, voice, text, images, other media, like what do those look like? Whether we're considering companions or we're considering tasks. We're considering the scope or the agency or autonomy. What's the right point at which we want to give control of our lives and our thoughts to chatbots? And also we want to explore whether it's in the consumer space and the personal space and the business space. So these are the aspects that we're exploring, and I've invited each of them to pick one of these and have a conversation and present a story they think of their vision of the future, and focusing on the sweet spot, forever better. So we're going to work from closest to farthest, if that's okay with you all. I'd love to start with Alice and your vision of this. The mic's all good. So over to you. How would you like to start? What does your vision look like? Is there a specific aspect with voice assistant? Is it the voice part, or is there another aspect you see? How is voice going to interact with other media? And where do you see in the strongest view for you about business versus consumer? How would you like to play that? What's your vision in this space of the future of chatbots?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot there. So we're seeing a whole new set of platforms come up and a whole new set of industries emerge from kind of the blossoming of conversational UI. We actually tend to, when we talk about the Google Assistant, we tend to think about conversational UI and conversational platforms, so people can actually get things done in natural language, even more easily and more accessibly than ever before. So when thinking about surfaces, we don't think about, well, which screen will win. It's actually about, we're creating a service that works anywhere you are seamlessly across screens, so there should be kind of an interplay between screens if needed, or screenless smart speakers to get something done or to get an answer in natural language. And when we're thinking about the future, it's too early to say. I think we're still in super early days of learning how to make basic tasks more accessible. And a lot of the problems we're solving for are very daily problems. So when you get up in the morning, what is frustrating today that could be simpler if you could actually just build a conversational design to fulfill it? So I think we're starting with quite humble first steps in the journey.
Okay, brilliant. And do you have anything to say about the vision that Google painted with Duplex?
I don't have any comments about Duplex specifically right now, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alice. So Tobias, you have a little bit more time because Alice has finished a little early. So would you like to talk about, we had a conversation before about the area you wanted to focus on was around the future of customer service. So would you like to talk about what that vision is in the next 3 to 5 years? What do you think? Is there a sweet spot where you think that's customer service solved for bots, or is there a place where you think, in fact, they just can continue to get better?
Sure. Well, I think first you have to kind of take a step back and understand. Can you hear me okay?
No, just the mic needed to pick up. Yep,
okay. Thumbs up if you can hear me okay.
Yeah. Woohoo.
Understand what we're talking about, right? Which is a UI. It's a user interface, and it's a user interface. Typically, any user interface gives you access to information or to processes or transactions on a very superficial, high-level level, and that can be applied in any area, really. And it then comes down to kind of picking the best UI for the job, because there's differences, there's different pros and cons, different strengths and weaknesses. When we talk business to consumer, or it's increasingly becoming consumer to business, C2B, there's of course tons of applications of conversational UIs, because if we shop with a company, we have questions, so we need information at times, and at other times we want to get something done, like make a reservation, or dispute a bill, or achieve something in the real world happening out of that as a result. So you then break it down to a conversation as a means to get something done. But specifically in the area of kind of business to consumer, you can break down different phases in the customer journey. So then it becomes a matter of finding out, where do chatbots work best? Is there use cases in every part of the customer journey, from customer acquisition, browsing around, shopping around, I don't yet really know what it is I need maybe, or if I do, then it should be a quick kind of question and answer type of interaction, to actually making the transaction, making the purchase, to then ultimately getting customer service, right? So it's kind of customer acquisition, e-commerce, customer service. And through the experience in the space, what I've kind of concluded for myself is that chatbots and conversational UIs work best when you have a relatively clear question in your mind that you want an answer for. Whereas GUIs, as opposed to CUIs, conversational UIs, graphical UIs work best, and that includes, by the way, walking into a store when you don't yet know what it is you need, and you want to be amazed and surprised and wowed and impressed, by the brand, typically in the shopping phase. There's only so much you can convey by speaking. The spoken, the conversational channel is a very low bandwidth channel. You can only put in so much information through in a given time unit, in a minute, in a second. So if I ask you to imagine, the homepage of CNN.com, very complex, right? Tons of content on that homepage. If I ask you to kind of call a friend and talk to them over the phone, read back what you see on the screen, it will take you minutes. Whereas it takes you a fraction of a second, if you see the homepage in front of you, to kind of analyze the macro structure of that page and know quickly, oh, here's the nav bar, here are the headlines, here's sports, where I want to go. So understanding that, keeping that in mind, it's a narrow bandwidth channel, but it's a channel that works exceptionally well if you have a clear question in your mind. You just want to get the question out and get an answer, versus how we do it today, which is the GUI model, which is very unintuitive and unuser-centric, which is menu-driven. So you come to a homepage of a company, and you have to follow their structure and navigate their menu and understand their categories and how they broke it down. No website today, unless they have a virtual assistant, can just let you type the question in and get an answer.
Great. So let me ask a question. So imagine, say, 5 years from now, I'm thinking of the things that I'm not getting addressed with customer service, and I think there's a really interesting nuance, I think, around like what the perfect customer experience is in some respects. To me, I feel like there is a potential point where we think actually that's the perfect experience. And in my mind, I'm thinking it's a combination of things, but really it's about it's the experience is integrated with the product is a big part of it, I'm thinking. And so, we have smart homes, we have some smart components in our home, and they're actually kind of annoying in many respects. So I'm wondering whether, in terms of that question of customer service, if we explore the agency component, the autonomy component, we have diagnosis in systems at the moment. Do we consider a possible future with customer service where that's built into the system too, and actually uses the usage information to anticipate potential issues?
I think you can address that question by thinking about, when is customer service best? Customer service is best when they value the most precious resource you have, which is time.
Okay.
So if you can resolve the issue or give an answer as quickly as possible with the least effort way for the consumer, as quickly as possible, least effort way for the consumer, then you provide a great experience. So if that's the end goal, then anything that gets you closer to that goal is a good thing to do. So, this autonomous agency of having an assistant that kind of learns my ways and then does things on my behalf is a nice idea. It's exceptionally hard to get it right, I think, because quite honestly, I don't know about you guys, but my preferences change all the time, like sometimes from minute to minute. So, a chatbot might pick up, or an AI might pick up that, yesterday he liked this coffee. Doesn't mean I want the same coffee today. Maybe I'm sick of that coffee. I want to try something else. How's the bot supposed to know? So personally, I'm a skeptic when it comes to that. But there are, of course, areas, and it always comes down to use cases. There's areas where it's relatively straightforward, what preferences are and what they should be. And yes, there's cases where I would rather not waste my most precious resource time to get something done. If it's straightforward, I want AI to do it. If it is not straightforward, I don't want AI to do it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tobias. Right, over to William. Now, we talked briefly about exploring voice specifically, about whether voice is a channel. There is an end goal or a sweet spot where you think voice-only computing has a sweet spot. Would you like to explore that or elaborate?
Yeah, so I kind of agree and disagree a little bit with the previous speakers. I think voice is, the big advantage of voice is everybody already knows how to use it. So everybody, we're talking about user interfaces, At the moment, when we interact with technology, there is a custom user interface for every product, which you have to learn, you have to explore. It's not always obvious how to use it. Since we were, as a child, we've learned how to interact with people, and we do it with conversation. And the only reason why voice is not everywhere is because it's technically extremely difficult. And for decades we have had voice-controlled conversational computers on sci-fi. You switch on the TV, you watch Star Trek, you watch Blake 7 as a kid, you see that interface because it is the most obvious, straightforward, easy-to-use interface there is. And the only reason we've only just started to have the beginnings of those sci-fi computers is because it's taken decades to get those technical problems beyond that magical point where you can build a useful product that you can speak to, that understands you most of the time, that converses with you, that does useful things. And I think this is something I'm very proud of with my involvement in Alexa, is that we proved that was now possible. There was some innovation there as well. But we built a product that has tens of millions of families using it daily, and is genuinely useful and covers enough of what you want the thing to do that it has real usage and adoption. I'm really excited about that. But as Alice said, it's also still very early. There's an awful lot of things you can't do with voice. There's a lot of things that you would like to be able to do. There's, when you interact with people, it's much more conversational. It's completely horizontal. But I think there is a world out there in the future where everything that you can currently do with technology, every bit of information that you can currently retrieve from the internet, every action that you can do with an app, every action that you can do online, is accessible through a omnipresent voice interface, and you don't need any future user interface. You don't need a GUI. You may have a GUI as well. It may be a natural, maybe the fastest way to do something, but everything will respond by voice. And when you talk to something and it doesn't respond, you'll think it's broken. And I think that's the future. As to specifically voice or voice plus screen, I think, as I think. Was it Tobias mentioned or Alice mentioned, there are definitely advantages occasionally to having a screen. There are situations where you need to present a lot of information at once, where graphically presented information is useful. But I think that's augmentative to the voice experience. I think you can do anything, pretty much anything with just voice if the system works. But obviously, if you're looking for something that's information rich, doing that with a conversation is going to be slower than having a screen. So I think if the screen's there, then the perfect experience is to use it. But if it's not there, it shouldn't prevent you doing anything.
Thank you. Now, I'm thinking about sci-fi because you bring this up. It's a really interesting aspect. So if I think about the two kind of ways in which people interact in the future, and the picture that sci-fi presents, we have a conversational component and we have the hand-wavy Minority Report component. And yet, the trend is showing that with the real growth now is in text. So what are your thoughts on that?
So technically, it's a detail. If you can type it, you can speak it, you can type it. Obviously, some of today's applications are definitely text-based. You go into a website, window appears. It's much easier to type than it is to speak. People use text to chat to their friends. There maybe is a future general-purpose text bot out there that's so. The voice assistants are typically horizontal, and I think voice is naturally horizontal. A graphical user interface constrains the user to the things that the app can do. If you have a voice interface, there's nothing you can do to control the customer's mouth. They are going to say things, that are not in scope, and the product needs to deal with that. And that's true. Actually, that's true of chatbots as well. But yeah, the way you see chatbots now are naturally vertical because they're typically very vertical situations. But language itself is horizontal.
Brilliant. Thank you. Lauren.
Yeah, okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Kunze. Thank you so much for being here. You must love chatbots because it's really hot. I run Pandorabots. We're the largest developer platform in the world. We have about 250,000 registered developers on the platform. We add about 4,000 new users every month, and some of those developers are inside of very large companies. And we also work with really big brands like Coca-Cola and Toyota to build out more complicated chatbot applications. And everyone on the executive team has been doing this about 15 years. So I've heard it's very early, but in some ways it's also very late. I know we're supposed to talk about the future, but I'll digress for a brief history lesson. This technology is actually not new. It originated in the 1960s out of MIT when a man named Joseph Weizenbaum built a therapeutic bot named Eliza. It was designed to mimic a Rogerian therapist. So you would say, I'm having problems with my mom. And the bot would say, you're having problems with your mom. Tell me more about that. And the guy who built it as kind of a jokey technology. And then he freaked out because his graduate students would talk to this thing for hours. Which is probably something Julia's seeing with her bot. So the technology is not actually new. And the most important future thing that has not happened yet is a breakthrough in the field of natural language understanding. So for those of you who've been here all day, you're probably hearing a lot about deep neural nets and all the breakthroughs that they've yielded in other historically hard AI problems. Things that Will has worked on, like speech recognition, speech synthesis, computer vision, image recognition. The same thing is not true for natural language understanding. And that's why a lot of chatbots are what I would call, as Wired unfortunately quoted me, so it's out there, crap bots. These things are hard to build. They're verticalized because they're hard to build, and that's a solvable problem. And eventually, I agree that voice will be the future when natural language understanding is solved, but we're not there yet. And I don't agree with you that the reason everything's not voice is a technical barrier. In some cases, we will always text. We text all the time, like, I don't know about you, but like, I don't even call my mom anymore. She doesn't like it, but like, I'm gonna text her, and that's how I'm gonna talk to everyone. And it's actually cheaper on the customer service side to switch from texting to voice. So I think texting is here to say, if I'm in a restaurant or I'm in a loud bar and I need to make a dinner reservation, I'm gonna text them. I'm not gonna call them.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Brilliant.
Yeah, as an option. I'm not saying it's only going to be a voice. I'm going to saying voice will be an option.
Right. Well, I think voice makes sense in the home, in the car, in some scenarios.
Yeah,
And
The privacy consideration.
there will definitely be some scenarios where if text is available, people will use it. I agree with that.
yeah.
Okay.
Great. So we don't have to fight anymore. We can still be friends. So I think once that is solved, like maybe NLU will be commoditized. Maybe it'll be like an AWS service or something we get from GCE, where we just understand, the words that are streaming in. We as humans don't actually understand how language works from a neuroscience perspective yet. So I think maybe we might need to understand that before we solve this problem of computers actually understanding language. But if it does get solved, then what's going to matter is what the bot says back and what the bot does. And I think we're looking at a world, we have over 325,000 chatbots right now. There's a new one getting created probably every minute. And there's probably, tons on other platforms, so maybe 500,000, 1 million bots, right? And a lot of those are domain specific. So I think ultimately, like future, we're all gonna have personal bots that help us filter on this network what people we wanna talk to and what brands are allowed to talk to us. So you'll set your filters for who's allowed to reach you, and this will all kind of be negotiated in messaging or voice. And maybe an Amazon Alexa won't actually be one general bot. It's a collection of skills on a network built by a lot of people.
Thank you. Great. So, Julie.
I think that I'm going to pick up on both of your topics, actually. So for those of you who are new, I'm the co-founder of Spot. The website is talktospot.com, and it helps you record and report workplace harassment and discrimination. And it uses a chat interface to help you recall and store those memories. Now, in terms of my vision for the future, I think I'm really big on, the reason I created Spot, let's go all the way, let's go sort of back to front. The reason I created Spot is because I think that people are really bad at remembering really important, precise information. And so I wanted to create something that's not like a human, it's specifically better than a human. And same thing with interviewing. This isn't trying to mimic a human conversation. This is trying to be better than a human conversation. And so the future of bots, I think that there is definitely also a space where we're trying to make bots more like humans. But I think there's a tangential space where we're trying to outsource things. And I think outsourcing memory is one thing we're already doing. That's Google. The fact that we can just Google things, that's a thing we've all embraced. And I think that's probably generally a good thing, because it frees up time for us to focus on concepts and how things fit together rather than having to remember all the low-level information. You still need to remember how to find that information, but that's a whole nother conversation. But in terms of the future, I think I would like to see more development in this space of really trying to do things better than, not just as good as. In terms of language, I think for memory, we know that actually talking to someone about your experiences can be really difficult and unstructured. And you've probably had this yourself. If you've written, like dictating an email for me, most of the time, unless it's really short, would seem absurd. Same thing with dictating an article that I'm going to publish. I would have to, trying to juggle all those pieces of information in my mind at the same time in a way that makes sense is really difficult. So for short things, great, but for long memories, for structured memories, emotional memories, probably not as great. In terms of therapy bots, Julian, you asked me yesterday in a conversation, why isn't your chatbot more empathetic? It's a good question. Why is our chatbot so practical, so pragmatic? When did this happen? I mean, they're very practical questions. The reason is that you can't have, from a memory standpoint, just like you can't have a human being who's simultaneously a police officer who's asking you questions about a crime and your therapist. Those are different people, and there's a reason for that. It's because the therapist's job is to change your memories. This is something we don't think about. You go in and you say, doctor or whomever, counselor, can you please help me get rid of the negative emotional content of this memory because it's intrusive on my life? if you're trying to preserve the accuracy of something, you don't want that. You don't want someone to get in there and mix things around and weaken the emotional response. No, you want to preserve it. So my response would be, first talk to our bot, then go to a therapist if that's something you need. But maybe just writing it down in and of itself gets it off your chest, and that's a cathartic process, and this is where any chat can also be cathartic.
Therapists, doctors, lawyers, they're all getting replaced or augmented.
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 Great. And what about the future then? How does this?
So the future, I think, is more harnessing things that we're not as good at, and that technology and chatbots specifically, I think, are better at. And structured interviews is definitely one of those. And not having, and I mean, there's been a lot of talk around bias in bots, and I think that's a really important conversation to have, because the people who are building these bots and these tools that we're using obviously have a huge influence on what the conversations look like. But beyond that, it is, I think, easier than for a human being to take those considerations in and to build a bot that isn't judgy, that isn't biased, in the same ways at least as a human being. And that can be really, really beneficial.
So if I were to paint a picture in the future, is it that I say, if someone says to me, you know, you had an argument with your son, I'd say, okay, Spot, did I have an argument with my son?
Hopefully not, because so my vision of the future, near future, say 5 to 10 years from now, I can't not see memory bots being part of our day, of our reality, but I don't mean that for everyday circumstances.
Okay.
But for memories that are really important and that you really want to preserve the accuracy of, which don't happen that often, but often enough that you might want somewhere to go. That's
Brilliant.
my vision of the future.
I've got lots of questions. We can move into the Q&A session shortly, but I want to also absolutely give Alex a little chance to paint your vision in this space before we move over to the Q&A section, to the Meet the Speaker section.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of exciting things have been said already. Earlier, Catherine said that it's like day one. It's like the Amazon motto. I think for me, and also when we talk to companies worldwide, it's probably, if we assume that it's day one, it's before the sunrise, I guess. Or like early days of the sunrise, this comes up. And I think the reason for this is also really more a technology leap that has to happen. But I kind of disagree with what Lauren said in the way that I guess it depends a bit how you phrase NLU and what you really mean with natural language understanding. And to give you a specific example of that, if Julian, for example, writes me an email and says something very specifically like, would you like to meet for beer Tuesday night at 8 p.m., maybe at a specific location somewhere in London, I can understand and kind of get what you mean and what you want to do. Maybe I don't even, because there's some other like level that, you know, you have some mission, whatever, right? You might want to use Rasa, maybe, you know, you want to talk about something else, whatnot. But I kind of get what you mean in general. But then it's up to me to decide, like, do I have time? Do I want to meet Julian? You know, maybe I have other like meetings pending and I'm not really sure where to go. And like, I guess all this decision making is something that we found when my co-founder and I started working with bots like 3 years ago, is extremely hard to do, because what people end up doing is they model pretty much conversations that go beyond one question and one answer, very rule-based. So you have all this like fancy machine learning nowadays with Dialogflow and Amazon Lex and all of that as a developer to extract structured information out of text. But then what's after, right? I mean, what do you do with that? And I guess in terms of also where we see this going, all of this information is very important. So it's important what somebody said. So it's important that Julian wrote me all the specific details of where we want to meet. But it's also important to integrate that with my calendar. But it's also very important to get more context, maybe about Julian and who he is, right? Maybe his LinkedIn profile also is very important for me, because I need to figure out, like, who is that guy if he cold emailed me? So taking all of these decisions is extremely hard to do, we think, at Rasa with a handcrafted and rule-based approach. Well, now you can come and say, let's just throw deep neural nets at that. And that's kind of the approach that people take as well, which I think is also not always true, right? I mean, if you think of like an insurance company, what you sometimes want to do, you want to have a flow that is like very rigid and you want to ask some specific questions. But then what if like your customer deviates from that flow, right? What if they ask a random question like, what's the weather like today in London? As we know, it's really hot. So maybe that influences as well how you want to steer the conversation. And I think that's where humans are really good at. Humans are very good at like getting some structure, at least like, you know, the good employees, I would say. You give them some structure and then they're able to generalize to new contexts and kind of use that knowledge almost like in a transfer learning way to apply to new situations that they haven't seen before. And that's pretty much what we work on at Rasa. So we have like the leading machine learning toolkit for developers to expand bots beyond just one question and one answer. And the way how we do this is with machine learning, but it's kind of an approach where you can use both almost at the same time. And coming back to my initial statement about it's just before sunrise, also we haven't figured out everything. So there's a lot of stuff happening right now in research, there's a lot of stuff happening when it comes to companies actually really generating data, right? Because all these big corps, they all have millions of transcripts and a lot of conversations with their customers, but it's almost a data disadvantage, I would say, because what we find is the best kind of data is really if you interact with that system, because people will behave differently with bots, but they also just will answer the questions that you ask, and then design comes in. So I think it's not as easy to say as there will be a tool where you can just click together everything, and I think that's always the dream of every CEO of a big company. We talked about earlier, just want to sit in Thailand on the beach and just look the messages that are coming in and see the KPIs and revenue growth. I think it's a bit too early for that. Talking about the near-term future, I don't even know if that's the future where we want to go to. But I think what we see is that the best experiences are built by product teams, and they are not just built by one business analyst who sits there and clicks together a bot, but it's built by a collection of people that works together to solve a real problem, right? Because in the end, for me, I also have an Echo and Google Assistant at home, and I think it's great for some use cases, and for some it's really not great. So I think there's still a long way to go. And I think what I'm really excited about these devices is that it shows people where it could go, right? Google Duplex, I think, is a great example of kind of inspiring the next great use cases, but then also they have a hard time scaling that to another use case, and that's what we are working on.
Brilliant. So I'll pick up the point about this beer, because I actually really want a beer now.
Well, I was the last speaker, so
yeah. So I wanted to check, doesn't mean, and so you're talking about the ulterior motive, which really we've touched on briefly with a number of speakers around context, right? So in your future, would you like this system to go, aha, when Julian says beer, this is code for he wants to browbeat you about why you haven't fixed this bug in your system for the last 6 months. What is the context that you envisage? Is there a sweet spot where you think, that's enough? That is it, and any past that, and it's really not useful, or it's going to be impractical, or is there a boundary by which this context you think could sit, or do you feel like we do want a demigod that can anticipate your every move?
Well, it's a tough question. I think it depends. I read once that, I think it's the founder of 37 Signals, he talked about doing user interviews, and his point was, I never take notes, because the important things come up all the time, and then I don't have to write them down. So, and I personally believe that not everything should be remembered, and it's sometimes actually good to not remember things. I mean, just think of a random person that you met at a party and they did something weird or whatever, and then you didn't remember it. It's actually great sometimes, right? So you can have a fresh start. So I think it's we are not on the more ethics and philosophical stage, but I think it touches on that a little bit. What I think you want though is that this stuff is kind of accessible for people and understandable for everyone in a way that it's not a black box, that it's not just one single API where you send everything you ever had and have to, and then you get a response back. And that's also the idea behind what we do with open source, that it's actually accessible for people and they can change things, they can modify the neural nets or in general the policies behind it. And we think that this is the way how these things will be built.
Great, thank you. Well, panel, it's time to move into the Meet the Speaker section, where we have an opportunity to take questions from the audience. If you'd like to take questions from the audience, then we're all going to move, as per all of the sessions at the conference, into the corresponding Meet the Speaker room. Now, can someone confirm exactly what direction this is? It's this, which way? This way, great. And it's got the same color, so it says Stage 5, getting from lab to live, Meet the Speaker. And that's where we're going to be in the next 5 minutes or so, where you can have a conversation with these talented people. Thank you, everyone on the panel. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.